Ma'am, shall we begin with ma'am?
Yes, sir. We can begin.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So, very good morning, one and all. We are gathered here for 1 week certification course on human rights. It is a day 5 section, which has been collaboratively handled by Department of Law, University of Mumbai, Department of Law Academic, and the MKLM's B. Alumni College of Commerce and Economics. Today, we have a resource person, uh, Priyanka Kumari ma'am. She is the assistant professor of BL Lamlani College. Ma'am gonna elaborate the concept on how the human rights will be important and what is the main essential of it. We expect a wonderful session from your side, ma'am. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. So hi, everybody. My name is Priyanka Amit Arora, and I've been teaching law for quite a while now. And I'll straight away take you to the presentation without further ado, so that we can start with the session right away. The session would be taken into 3 parts. The first part would be dealing with the evolvement of human rights. Then we are going to learn about the differences between the constitutional rights, fundamental rights, and these human rights, how they are placed, and the legal rights rather. And towards the end of the session, I would like to tell you ladies, because this of course is a women's college, I would like to stress on certain laws which a woman, as a woman or a girl, of course, you should know. So there are 12 laws which are very important, and as a woman, we should all be aware about it. All right. So let's just start with the session. I'm going to present my screen now. This is basically a presentation that I've prepared for this session, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. Just give me a minute, please. So if you can quickly let me know whether you can see my screen. If one of you can just unmute and let me know you can see my screen, can you?
Yes, ma'am, it is visible.
Oh, it's visible. Thank you. All right. So let's just begin this. All right. This is a quick rewind of what you need to see today. Let's just get on to our first slide. Human rights. Yes, that's the topic for us today. All right. When we see the screen here, what we basically see is the year 1948. Now, this year 1948 is very important. And why is that important? Because on this day, United Nations passed or adopted, let's say adopted, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's what we see and we have heard rather in our civics, lessons during our school time. I remember even now this lesson is covered in your civics, history and civics that we used to learn during our schools. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So what is that? If you can just rewind, it is a document that talks about the basic human rights, the rights that all the people have just because they are humans. You're a human, so you have these rights. All right. But then why was the necessity? What was the necessity? Here comes. Let's just understand the scenario before 1948. What had happened before 1948? So before 1948, all around the world, you could see some wars and conflicts, people killing each other, annexations, etc. There was a lot of violence. Violence against whom? Against not only the peer people, not just the enemies per se, but then even the people who were of a different race, different caste, the women, you know, lot of violence. Then there was also a lot of discrimination, of course, caste, creed, religion, color. Then we also saw dictatorship. One person, no democracy. One person trying to rule and make sure that he gives all his ideas and makes them executed by the people. And this is dictatorship. Then there was an arbitrary arrest. What is arbitrary arrest? So you can arrest anybody, anytime, without any reasons, without any specific law, without any, just because you want it. That was an arbitrary arrest. And then, of course, we all know about slavery. Slavery is what? We all know about slavery, I think. But just to reiterate, it is when people are taken as slaves. When we say slaves, in Hindi, there's a term which is known as bandhwa mazdoor. That means you have been bought like an asset and like an object, and you are going to be used as and when or at the pleasure of the person who has bought you. Okay, so those were slaves. We've heard a lot of stories about slaves when we have read about the revolutions, industrial revolutions in our histories, and how the Africans were taken as slaves in most parts of the world, right? So this was the situation, and it was a very grave one. And hence what happened? And hence the manifestations were there. What do you mean by manifestations? Because of all these problems, all these, unrighteous acts that were happening all around the world, this was manifested. People started thinking, and the protests started happening. People started getting together, not only in one country, but across the world. People started raising voices. We want these rights. We are also human beings. We should be treated equally. We should not be, people should not make any indifferent behavior towards us, right? And that was getting together. Hence, the United Nations came together and adopted this Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And what happened then? This. So what happened was that the human rights were accepted universally. Just because you are a human, you have to have these basic rights. What are those rights? Very simple language. Everybody had a right to vote, had a right to life, freedom, justice and equality, healthcare, marry and have a family, education, work and have a job, home shelter, freedom of expression, freedom of religion. And so almost 30 odd rights were there. I'm sorry, I think the 30th is not visible over here. So there were 30 rights which were there. If you can quickly see, these were adopted on December 10th, 1948. And December 10th also happens to be the Human Rights Day since then. All right, so we'll just quickly see what was those rights. See that everybody is born free and is equal. So slavery is getting, out of question here. So everybody had rights despite differences. Even if I think differently, you think differently, I have a say, all right? We all have a right to live and live safely. Just because there is a person who has a lot of money cannot always threaten me to do his work. And hence, I have a right to live and I can live safely without any threat. Of course, the slavery, the torture, all these things were taken care. There were certain rights, with respect to dignity, social protection. We can think freely. That includes the religion. We all can have property. All these rights were there. So these were the basic human rights. But then, in India, Again, I'll go back to civics because, during the school times, we are often taught civics, and that's the first time that we are introduced to things like these. So I'm sure you must have heard about the fundamental rights, or you must have also read the Constitution. Fundamental rights are the part of the Constitution. So I will just quickly give a brief, difference between what are fundamental rights, what are constitutional rights, and what are statutory rights. Because, these things are the basics of law when it comes to, rights and, claims that we do. Okay. So we'll talk about difference between fundamental right and constitutional rights. We'll also discuss the difference between constitutional rights and legal rights. Okay, but because we have just spoken about human rights, I'll give you a little formal introduction of that. And then we'll jump onto this slide, because then it is going to make more sense to you. Okay, here. So in the small portion of the presentation, we will speak about what is human rights, the meaning and definition. This is more formally. Objects, sources, kinds, and concept. So let's begin with the meaning and definition. So more formally, if we talk about meaning, would mean human rights that are the basic rights of and freedoms that belong to every person in the world from birth until death. Okay. Now, these can never be taken away, right? But yes, there can be a restriction to these rights. Yes, these are absolute. Yes, when it is said that these are absolute rights of a person just because he is a human. But this absolute right can get revoked. Not revoked, in fact, it can be restricted, limited, if a person breaks the law, for example, or if it is a matter of a national security, then these rights can be restricted. I'll give you a quick example. So suppose there is some kind of a chaos in the society, and say people are not allowed to assemble. Okay, if people are allowed to assemble. Now, if people are allowed to assemble, that's a right, basic right of a person, to express himself. But then suppose there is some kind of a dire circumstance in the society, then the law can restrict this and say that not more than 3 people or 4 people or 5 people can gather at a place, right? Some kind of a section gets invoked and you cannot assemble in large numbers. So this is restriction. Okay. Then the basic human rights, of course, we've seen like 30 rights that I just showed you on the screen, were the rights to life, dignity, fairness, equality, respect, and independence. Then, if you go to the formal definition, it's in Section 2D of the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993, which says that human rights means the right related to life, liberty, equality, and dignity of individual, guaranteed by the Constitution or embodied in the international covenants and enforceable by courts in India. Okay, so this is the more formal definition, which comes under the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993. There are other definitions which I should cover, in fact, and those are being given by different jurists, the judges or the members of the jury. And how they have defined it is that, so according to Suzanne Moller-Rokin, she's a jurist, who says human rights as a claim to something of crucial importance for human life, right? Another one would be human rights are the basic values. Okay, so he's termed it as basic value, very beautifully actually put in over there, which underlie the human beings born in any part of the world are equal in dignity and rights. So human rights are the basic values which underlie that human beings born in any part of the world are equal in dignity and rights. That's according to Dr. Purohit. Now let's see the objects. What is the objective here? You know, so the first is, of course, to protect the human being. Now, see, the objectives are portrayed in a little more legal and difficult language. I've tried to put them more simpler way. The first is to protect the human being. That's the basic. The second is to develop individual self-respect. Everybody has the self-respect and has all the rights, to protect it. The value, to value human dignity. Everybody has a dignity. As a human being, I have dignity and I have all the rights to protect it. Nobody has a right to, go against that. Then, to promote respect, understanding, and appreciation of diversity. To promote democracy, social justice, and friendship among people and nations. So those are very, very understandable in very easy language. Now let's understand that how different sources made up a formal human rights section. How different sources were used, or how human rights evolved from different sources, let's say. The first was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I just introduced you to. The second is international treaties and covenants. Third, international customs. Fourth, judicial decisions. And fifth, official documents. Let's see them one by one. Okay, so I guess I've not given a little detail of this, because then we'll have to go into a lot of details. So we'll not define them. So it's basically, the international treaties are the various treaties which happen between the countries, the understandings between the countries. And then, of course, the international customs, how people used to carry things internationally, and how those customs were taken as source for drafting the human rights, and how judicial decisions, if you know the precedent, I don't know if you've heard the word precedents. So precedents are the judgments that have been passed initially, and seeing those as an example, the decisions are made in future. So all those decisions were kept in mind while drafting the human rights. So it has also become a source of human right. And of course, certain other official documents. Now let's talk about how those human rights can be classified. Classified into civil and political right, economic and social right, collective right. Okay, so let's go on to the civil and political rights first. So those rights which were contained in the covenants of the civil and political, came under the category, right? And we see their origin in 13th century in Magna Carta. So what is Magna Carta? Okay, so I'll also tell you that these civil and political rights were also called the first generation rights. Then economic and political rights were called as second generation rights. And the collective rights were known as the third generation rights. So when civil and political rights are to be talked about, we say that their origin comes from the 13th century Magna Carta. So what is Magna Carta? I'll tell you. So, it's basically a great charter, in other words, and it is basically a document which guaranteed, the English political liberties, which was drafted at, there was a place called, I'm just forgetting the name. It was, I think, Runnymede, it was a kind of a meadow by the River Thames in London. And it was signed by King John, that was signed on June 15th, 1215, in the year 1215. And that was signed under pressure of his rebellion barons. Who were the barons? So barons were the members of the lowest, order of nobility in the British nobility. So in other words, Magna Carta was a charter which guaranteed the fundamental rights and privileges. All right. All right. So what were those rights basically? Again, these basic rights were not available even that time. People were suffering. People were suffering because, again, as I mentioned, as I showed you things before 1948, they said that before 1948, there was a lot of arbitrary arrest. People were, uh, people were, discriminated on the basis of caste, creed, color, and there were a lot of atrocities on the people of lower economic backgrounds. All right, so that was the first time that the barons had revolted against King John, and this Magna Carta was made to sign forcefully by King John. And hence, that was the first source that civil and political rights was based on. All right. So then, when we talk about economic and social rights, which is also known as the second generation rights, so these rights refer to economic and social rights which are considered to have been originated in Russian Revolution. And that is, of course, in 1917, and in the Paris Peace Conference of 1919. And what did it talk about? It basically set out the rights relating to food, clothing, housing, and adequate standards of living and freedom from hunger. Right? So these were more social and economic rights. And then the third generation rights, those were the collective rights. So what about them? So individuals, so when we talk about an individual, so how we say that human is a social animal. So human is a social animal would mean what? That humans cannot remain without a society. And society consists of number of people who are grouped into certain units or communities. And then those communities become, say, small villages or cities or towns. And then they convert as a collectively are known as state. And those states, when I say state here, I mean the countries, okay? And then not just the states, because we are the members of the world also, right? So collective rights are those rights which not only, this international law not only recognizes this inalienable rights of the individuals, but also recognizes those rights which are the collective rights. That means a person will have a right individually, but will also stand or will also have a right because he's a member of a community or a group or a state, right? Or he being a global citizen. Okay. So, for example, right to self-determination, right to peace and development, etc. So these are the human rights types. All right. Oh, of course, I spoke to you about Magna Carta. So a quick look again. Magna Carta is also known as Great Charter. And it was agreed to by King John of England on 15th of June, 1215, to make peace between the unpopular king and a group of people. So unpopular king was King John. I mentioned it earlier. And the group of people were the barons, who were the lowest order of the nobility in the British order of nobilities. And it also promised the protection of church rights, of course. Okay. Then in 1628, the Petition of Rights. This was also a portion that is to be covered now. A statement of civil liberties sent by the English Parliament to Charles I. Human rights were improved or enhanced in this petition. So, slowly, gradually, there were a lot of changes that were made, and the improvements, I would say, that were done while, how and what we know as human rights today. So it was not an overnight thing. Then again, the Bill of Rights, 1689. It is, of course, it is also a landmark act in the England constitution, and we all know that our constitution is quite based on the two constitutions. One is American and one is England, and that also set out certain basic civil rights. Yeah. Then there was another important a concept in human rights which we have to talk about is the Virginia Declaration in 1776. So this declaration specified a number of fundamental rights of a man, and the rights affirm that all men by nature are equally free and independent and have their certain inherent rights. All right. Then again, the Constitution of USA, 1787, it also talked about fundamental rights of man. And then the French Declaration in 1789, again, it spoke about Declaration of Rights of Men and Citizen. Then, of course, came our very own Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. And this is indeed a historic document. So you can see how this has evolved through hundreds of years, and that was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. And it is a milestone document in the history of human rights. And it, for the first time, this document set out that fundamental human rights are to be protected universally. All right. Then we talk about the international covenants here. So what do you mean by covenant? It's basically an agreement, okay? So it's a legal agreement, and especially one to pay a regular amount of money to somebody or something. And that's a literal meaning basically, but here you have to understand it as a promise to somebody or a legal agreement, or understanding agreements that are done between the countries here, international covenants, the understandings, the agreements. So the United Nations General Assembly adopted two covenants. One was on 16 December 1966, and that was on civil and political rights. And the other one was International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So this is just the history. And of course, we all know about National Human Rights Commission. What is that? So this commission is basically how human rights are protected in India. Okay, so there is a commission which is known as National Human Rights Commission, NHRC. It is basically a statutory public body. Statutory means that it has been enacted out of a special enactment of law, and that was made on 12th October 1993. And it basically is responsible for protection and promotion of human rights, and which are defined by the Act as rights relating to life, liberty, equality, and dignity of the individual, which is of course guaranteed by the Constitution and embodied in the international covenants and is enforceable by courts of law in India. We'll just quickly see the functions and then we'll go back up the presentation, which you might find a little more interesting than this. Okay, so what would be the functions of NHRC? That's the National Human Rights Commission. It's very important for you to know. So the first is that it, of course, protects, it proactively or reactively inquire into the violation of human rights by Government of India or negligence of such violation by a public servant. So if there is any kind of a flaw with respect to human rights, which has been committed by, say, government or any kind of a person relating to government or a public servant, then the Human Rights Commission would on its own or as a reaction, when we say reactively means as a reaction to what has happened, can inquire as to the reasons of the violations of human rights. That's the first. Then this was the inquiring and taking actions when it comes to that. The second is it also recommends measures for the effective implementations. Implementation of what? The human rights implementation. Then it reviews the factors, including the acts of terrorism that inhibit the enjoyment of human rights. And it also recommends the appropriate remedial measures. It also studies treaties and other international instruments on human rights. And then it makes recommendations so that they can be implemented effectively. It also undertakes and promotes researches in the fields of human rights. Then it also tries to visit the jails, and it tries to study the conditions of the inmates. Inmates means those people who are there in the jail, in order to see whether what is the treatment of them. Are they actually treated like humans or not? Then they also engage in human rights education, which is a very, very important part of this among the various sections of the society. They promote awareness of the safeguards and which are available for the protection of these rights. How do they do it? Through various publications, through the media, through the seminars, and other available means. They also encourage the efforts of NGOs and institutions that work in the field of human rights voluntarily, whenever the necessity of the protection of human rights arises. And then they also requisite, any kind of a public record. So they call for those public records, that is requisitioning. And then they can also call for it from any court or any office. So those were just the functions of NHRC. Now, we will go to this portion. So we've just talked about the human rights and how they are, little basics, how it evolved, what are the objectives. We also talked about that how they are protected, by what agency they are being protected in India, by the Human Rights Commission. Let's talk about a little about the fundamental rights, constitutional rights, and statutory rights, and what are the differences between them, because this is a very important portion. So we all know that fundamental rights are the rights which are made available to every citizen of India, because he being an Indian citizen. And where is it stated? It is stated in Part 3 of the Constitution of India. Part 3, specifically from Articles 12 to 35. Now, of course, these are very necessary rights in a democratic country. For why is that? For the development of its citizens intellectually, morally, and spiritually. And these are the basic or the fundamentals which are essentials for the development of a person, and hence it is known as a fundamental right. And what are those rights, or what is included in these rights? Right to equality, life and personal liberty, religion, right against exploitation, compulsory education, cultural rights, freedom, right to constitutional remedies, etc. Then when we talk about the constitutional rights, what are those? So those rights which are written in the Constitution expressly are known as constitutional rights. Now, if there is any law which is in contradiction with these, any other law which is in contradiction with these constitutional rights is considered unconstitutional and hence invalid. Now, we all know that the fundamental rights are in the Constitution. Therefore, all fundamental rights are constitutional rights. But then there's a catch here. Can we say that all constitutional rights are fundamental rights too? No. Fundamental rights are only the rights which are there in the Part 3 of the Constitution. Okay. But because it is there in the Constitution, so all the fundamental rights are constitutional rights. But then all the constitutional rights are not fundamental rights. I hope it is understandable. All right. Now there's another kind of a right which is known as a legal right. What are those rights? So legal rights means those rights which are recognized, protected, and restricted by a particular statutory law. So what is a statute? Statute is basically a collection of law. Okay. So those rights which are protected, so first is recognized, of course, protected and restricted by a particular law. Now, legal rights are governed by specific law. For example, now if I want to get some kind of an information, so do I have a right to get the information? Well, I always had this, right to get the information, but it was not legally recognized. This was legally recognized in 2005 by virtue of a legal right. Right? I always had, I could desire or demand, yes, but then it was not a right, legal right given to me before the Right to Information Act 2005 came. So I'll give you a small example. Before 2005, generally, if I were to ask why my work was not done in a government department, those government departments were not legally bound to give me the answer in writing, right? If they wanted, they could give. If they did not want, they did not give. And most of the time, of course, they never wanted. But after 2005, Right to Information Act, when it became, it came into force, it became effective, I would say. Then, so suppose, take an example, I had applied for a license, and normally a license should come to me, say, in a specific number of days, say 40 days. Now, in those 40 days, if I am not given any information, nor did my license come to me, I go to the department and I ask that I had applied and I have not attained my license. I have not received my license. The person would say, did you give the proper documents? Yes, my documents were in order. It was checked and everything was paid, the fees, etc. Everything was done properly. And I was promised that I'm going to get my license through post, within these many days. Now it's been 3 months, I've not received it. Let me know that why this has not been received by me. So the person was not liable under law to answer me in writing that time. But after 2005 came into force, they have to answer me within a specific period. That's right to information. Okay? And that's a legal right now. Now, to whom are these legal rights available? क्या कोई भी जाके उसको ले सकता है, invoke कर सकता है इन rights को? No. These legal rights are available to people who are eligible under the laws. And that eligibility is always specified under those laws, that who is eligible to do this, a particular thing. Okay. Now, let's see what is the difference between fundamental right and constitutional right. Okay. So fundamental rights the first point would be that these are protected and guaranteed by the Constitution, and it cannot be taken away by any ordinary law which is enacted by the legislature. We all know what a legislature is. The wing which basically creates the legislations, the laws. So we have 3 wings, we all know: executive, judiciary, and third is, anybody would like to answer? No? All right. Please find that out. I'm amazed that you don't know that, or maybe you don't want to answer. That's okay. Okay. So these are the rights which are protected and guaranteed by the Constitution, and they cannot be taken away by the ordinary law enacted by the legislature. When it comes to the constitutional rights, these are protected by an ordinary law, but they can be altered or taken away by the legislature, because if they change that law. All right. Now, if the fundamental right is violated, the Constitution provides the affected person the right to move to the High Court or the Supreme Court. okay, directly to the High Court or the Supreme Court if the fundamental right is violated. But if the constitutional right is violated, where can a person go? He can move an ordinary court. Okay, then the fundamental right is a right against the state. But when you talk about the constitutional rights, it is available against another individual, but in some cases, it is also against the state. The fourth point would be fundamental rights are protected against the executive. Oh, you got the answer. Legislature and the judiciary. All right. So these are the three wings. Laws and executive actions which are in conflict with such rights are void and ineffective. How and when? If they harm basic structure of the Constitution. But in case of constitutional rights, the constitutional rights of an individual can be waived off, as all constitutional rights are not fundamental rights. I hope till here it is clear. There's another difference is that our Constitution guarantees the right to move to Supreme Court. For what? For enforcement of fundamental rights. Thus, the remedy itself is a fundamental right. Right to constitutional remedies. Remember? No such guarantee in case of a constitutional right. Sixth point would be that all fundamental rights are constitutional rights. This, of course, we've discussed. All constitutional rights are not fundamental rights. Now, let's talk about the difference between the constitutional rights and the legal rights. Okay. So constitutional right is the one which flows specifically and directly from the constitution of a country. Okay. But legal rights can flow from any law of that place. Any law of that place. Not directly from the constitution. Any law. Here it has to be specifically and directly from the constitution. Sorry. Then all constitutional rights are legal rights, of course, but all legal rights are not constitutional rights. This you can understand well now. Now, the constitutional right is more fundamental to the people living in that country, and all other laws and rights flow from the constitution, right? And here, a legal right cannot in most cases prevail over a constitutional right. So what does this mean? That if there is a conflict between a legal right and a constitutional right, then constitutional right will be superior and will prevail. Okay. The next would be constitutional rights are very strictly protected, but a legal right is more easy to be taken away. You remember the definition or the introduction of legal rights that we've done, that it can be restricted. Remember, it can be restricted. Okay. Then a constitutional right, however, is such a right. Sorry, the constitutional right, however, such as the rights to free speech cannot be taken away per se. But the right to property, and this is just an example to state, okay, that the right to property in India is a legal right and can be taken away by the state. Okay. All right. Oops. Yeah. Now, this would be a little interesting to you guys, and I think it has to be, it is very important that you should all know about it. I'm going to, most of you might also know about it, I don't know, but then I thought that it would be really relevant for you, that you should know about these 12 legal rights that are there, especially for the women folk. Okay, you should have this awareness with you. Okay, so the first is So when we see this picture, we generally see, we of course know the sexual harassment that women have to face while working in the offices, etc. And we should all know that we have a law regarding this. So the law's name is Sexual Harassment of Women at the Workplace. It's the Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013. What does it do? It ensures the safety of a woman at a workplace, and it also seeks to protect them from sexual harassment wherever they are working. And under this act, the females are given the right to do what? To file a complaint against any kind of sexual harassment which she has faced at her workplace. So you should all know that there is a law regarding the prevention, prohibition, and redressal of sexual harassment of women at workplace, and this comes under the Act 2013. Okay, so that's a picture. So from this, you can very well know that this the law which I'm going to talk about now is regarding the maternity benefits that a woman should have. You should all know that what are those benefits, so that, you know, in case you are aware of that, you can always claim those rights, claim them as your rights. So we'll just see what are those. So this act is the Maternity Benefit Act 1961, and this regulates the employment of women and maternity benefits which are mandated by this law, Maternity Benefit Act. And what does it state? It states that a woman employee who has worked in an organization for a period of at least 80 days during the 12 months preceding the date of her expected delivery is entitled to receive the maternity benefits, which includes maternity leave, nursing breaks, and medical allowance. Then we all know what is this. This was very prevalent earlier, but now, of course, people are getting more aware, more educated, and but, you know, there are certain places in India, especially in the remote villages, that this custom is still being followed, unfortunately. But if you're aware that we have laws, you know, around it now, in the sense it's been existing for long now, but maybe you're not aware about it. And the law states that say no to child marriage. That's the objective. And what is that? It says the Child Marriage Act. And what does this law say? It says, this came in 2006, the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act. And what does this say? That according to the International Research Center for Women, you know, almost 47% of the girls are married before the age of 18. And in India currently, India is currently ranked 13 in the world when it comes to child marriages. Because, you know, this has been into our culture, Indian culture and tradition, since long. I mean, from the very beginning, I would say it had been steeped into our culture since centuries, and it was very difficult to eliminate it. So in 2006, the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act came, and it was made effective in 2007. And what does this act say? It says that the child marriage is defined as a marriage where the groom or the bride are underaged. And what are the ages which have been defined? For the bride, it is 18 years. And for the boy, it is 21 years. And if parents trying to marry the underage girls are subject to action under the law, and this makes the marriage as illegal, right? And yeah. Then the next is, now this is a very important thing that you should know as a woman, that if there is, you know, any complaint that you want to register, complaint in the form of an FIR, you know, first information report, to the police station, you want to register, then there is a right which has been given to a woman, that you can register the complaint virtually. Okay, what is this? Law. The law says that law gives women the provision for filing the virtual complaints. How? Via email or writing her complaint. So right now it's not about the FIR, sorry. This is about the virtual complaints that a woman can make. Sending it to a police station from a registered postal address. The SHO sends a police constable to her place to record her complaint. Here the recording is done. And this is in a case where a woman, and when is it actually viable? When is it required or it can be invoked? So the requirement is that if a woman is not in a position to go physically to a police station and file a complaint. Okay. Okay. Then there's another law which women should be aware of, which says the medical termination of the pregnancy. What does it say? There's an act which is known as Medical Termination of the Pregnancy Act 1971. And this act came into effect in 1972. It was amended twice, 75 and 2002. What is the aim of this act? Is to reduce the occurrence of illegal abortion and consequent maternal mortality and morbidity. Okay, there were a lot of cases, and it states clearly that the conditions under which a pregnancy can be ended or aborted, and specifies the persons qualified to conduct the same. So this basically defines that who are the people who can go for this, and the conditions under which this can be done, right? Then, yes, this is also very important. With the picture, you can always see that there is a lot of discrimination which happens at workplaces between women and men. So there is a law regarding this which says that men and women should be treated equally when it comes to equal pay also. Just because there is a woman, she should not be given lesser remuneration. So what does this act say? Women have the right to be paid equally. There's an act which is known as Equal Remuneration Act, and it says that but cannot be discriminated on the basis of sex when it comes to salary, pay, or wages. And working women have the right to draw an equal salary as compared to men. All right, this is also very important. So you can see that there are certain times that women might have to get arrested for some reason, but then also, there is a certain sense of dignity and decency which has to be maintained when it comes to women. So in an event, if, this was, if the women have, has been accused of certain, say, crime or certain event, and there has to be any medical examination procedure which has to be followed or performed on her, then it is essential that it has to be done in the presence of another woman. Very important. Then again, indecent presentation to women is also an act which we should all know about. It says that, so there's an act which is known as Indecent Representation of Women Prevention Act 1986. This act prohibits the indecent representation of women through advertisements or in publications, writings, paintings, figures, or in any other manner. Okay, then also there is this female sexual assault victims, they also have a right. They have a right to remain anonymous. Their identity should not be revealed. It should be kept secret. What does it say? This right ensures that the privacy of a woman should be protected at all times. And a woman who has been sexually assaulted may record her statement alone before the district magistrate when the case is under trial, or in the presence of a female police officer. She has the right to do this. And then, yes, there is another important thing which you should know, and that is the last one which I'm going to discuss today. There's a right of zero FIR. So if an FIR, which has to be filed at any police station, then that can be filed by a woman at any police station. So normally, the FIR has to be filed in a police station which has a jurisdiction, but here a woman should not, she doesn't have to wait for going to a police station for the right jurisdiction. She can file a complaint at any police station, irrespective of the location where the incident occurred, or to search for a specific police station under whose jurisdiction that complaint comes, actually. And so this is known as a zero FIR. Later, the zero FIR can be moved to the police station in whose jurisdiction the case falls. And this was a ruling which was passed by the Supreme Court because it felt that it was necessary to save the victim's time, and very essential because it can prevent an offender to escape. Okay, so I'll stop sharing my screen now. So this was all about today's presentation on human rights. So what we did quickly, we'll just recap. First, we talked about the general meaning of human rights. Then we had a little detailed presentation on human rights, its concepts, its objectives, the various sources, how it got evolved. And we also talked about the Human Rights Commission, how it protects and what it does, the functions. We also talked about the differences between the constitutional rights, the fundamental rights, and the legal rights, and which one is superior and prevails over the other rights. We also talked about the 12 important legal rights which a woman should be aware of. So it's the end of the session now. I hope you enjoyed the session, and you have taken a little learning from whatever we discussed today. Thank you very much, and have a nice day ahead to you all. Have a nice week.